I never thought I'd see my mother fall for another man so soon after leaving my father. Their 25-year marriage had crumbled under the weight of his manipulation, and when she finally gathered the strength to walk away, I admired her resilience. But love, or at least the need for companionship, can make people blind. That's how Chris entered our lives. My mom met him at a local diner where he worked as a manager. She was vulnerable, still grieving the years she lost in an unhappy marriage, and he was charming in a way that felt rehearsed. I didn't question it much at first. My siblings and I, sis, bro, and me had all moved in with Mom after the divorce. We wanted to be there for her, so when she introduced Chris, I told myself to keep an open mind. He had a past, sure, a DUI conviction and a short stint in jail. Mom worked as a corrections officer, so I figured she saw something in him that others didn't. Maybe he had changed. Maybe he was a better man now. For a while, things seemed fine. We all got along, more or less. Chris and I bonded over video games, and he made Mom smile again. That was enough for me. Until 2017. One morning, Chris left for what should have been a routine probation check-in. He never came back. Hours passed, and we grew worried. Then the phone rang. It was him, from Texas. The FBI had been waiting for him at the courthouse. His family had deep ties to gang activity and drug trafficking, and while Chris had always claimed he was never truly involved, he had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. A single drug handoff, a car ride with the wrong people, and now he was caught in the web. But Chris wasn't going to rot in a cell. He cut a deal to testify against his family in exchange for a shorter sentence. They let him out, pending trial, but his world had already begun to crumble. So had my mother's. Through countless late-night calls, she held on to him. She planned their future together, convincing herself that once he was free for good, they'd have their happily ever after. And for a time, it seemed like that might happen. Chris returned home and picked up right where he left off. His boss at the diner, a longtime friend, gave him back his managerial position. Mom welcomed him with open arms, then the drinking started. It wasn't that he hadn't drunk before after all. He had a DUI, but this was different. This was half a case of beer a night, maybe more. It transformed him. Sober, he was tolerable. Drunk, he was cruel. He never hit us, never raised a hand to Mom, but words can cut just as deep as fists. Mom made excuses. He's under stress from work. The trial is making him anxious. He just needs time to adjust. Years passed, until the night she finally had enough. Chris stumbled through the door wasted beyond belief. Mom had been waiting for him, and as soon as he swayed into the living room, she demanded answers. Have you been drinking? Silence, Chris, he laughed. That was all she needed. Get out. She didn't scream. She didn't argue. She simply pointed to the door. And for the first time since we met him, Chris had nothing to say. He packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. The next morning, Mom called us into the living room. I want him gone for good. She asked us to gather the rest of his things so he wouldn't have a reason to come back. We agreed. We thought that was the end. Until there was a knock at the door, and Betty stood on the other side. Betty, Chris's co-worker, a girl I went to high school with. A girl whose face was twisted with guilt as she looked my mother in the eye and said, I have something you need to hear. She told us everything. Chris had been cheating with a woman named Darla, at work, in his car, in the storage closet. Anywhere he could get away with it. And Darla was pregnant. Mom sat in stunned silence. Betty begged her not to reveal who told her. Chris had threatened to fire her if she ever spoke a word of it, but she couldn't keep the secret anymore. Mom's expression darkened. She wasn't sad. She wasn't even surprised. She was angry. And that was the moment she stopped making excuses for him. Throw all of his stuff outside, every last piece of it, and we did. Clothes, electronics, even his stupid beer cans. Everything Chris owned was dumped into the alley behind our house. By the time Mom called him, she was calm. Deadly calm. She told him she knew. She told him his things were waiting outside. And when he tried to deny it, she simply said, Betty told me everything. Silence. Then, he laughed. He admitted it all. He said he was glad Darla was pregnant, that he had always wanted his own kid, and my mom had robbed him of that chance. That he didn't care about hurting her, that he didn't regret a damn thing. The last words she ever spoke to him were simple. Goodbye, Chris, but for me, bro, and sis. That wasn't enough. We wanted revenge. Chris thought he had one. He thought he could cheat on my mom, walk away without consequences, and build a new life with Darla, but he underestimated just how far we were willing to go. Mom might have washed her hands of him, but sis, bro, and I weren't ready to let it go. We started with his job. Chris had been the manager of the local Dairy Queen, a franchise run by a close friend of our family. And now we knew that he had been using his workplace as a personal motel for his affair. We made a phone call. The owner was silent for a moment after we told him everything. Then he sighed. I had a feeling something was off, he admitted. Within a week, Chris was fired. But we weren't done. A few days later, we got word that he had found a new job at another Dairy Queen in a town about an hour away. It wasn't hard to track him down. Small towns love to talk. So we made another phone call. This time, it took longer. The new franchise owner wasn't as quick to act, since there was no direct evidence of Chris using that store for anything inappropriate. But we knew that his history would catch up with him. It did. A month later, Chris was jobless again. That was to victories, but then things took a turn. Chris started showing up in our neighborhood. At first, we thought we were imagining it. But then we saw Darla's car parked just down the street. It wasn't a coincidence. He was watching us, watching my mom. What the hell was he planning? We weren't going to wait to find out. Chris had one fatal weakness, his DUI conviction. Even after all these years, his probation had never been lifted due to his involvement in the Texas case. That meant he still wasn't legally allowed to drive. And yet, here he was. Driving, alone, it was all we needed. We made a call to the local police. We told them that Chris was driving a car without a valid license. We gave them Darla's plate number and told them to pull it over the next time they saw it. They listened. 2 weeks later, the call came in. Chris had been pulled over, and, surprise, he was drunk. Again, he was arrested on the spot. But that wasn't even the best part. When the police searched Darla's house, where he had been staying, they found guns. Chris was a felon. Felons aren't allowed to be around firearms. So now, on top of driving under the influence, he was hit with illegal possession of firearms. More jail time, and the best part, his timing couldn't have been worse. Because just as he finished serving time for this set of charges, Texas came calling. His trial was finally starting. Chris was sent back to Texas to face his past. And while he sat in prison, waiting for his fate to be decided, his son was born, the son he had bragged about. The one he had claimed he always wanted. But Darla, she wasn't waiting for him. She took one look at the mess Chris had made of his life and cut ties. By the time Chris was sentenced and shipped off to a long-term prison, he had lost everything. His job, his home, his freedom, and now, his child. But even from his cell, he still wasn't done with my mom. Because that's when the letters started. The first letter arrived a few months after Chris was locked away in Texas. It was written in messy, frantic handwriting, like he had scrawled it out in a hurry. Mom didn't even open it at first. She just stared at it, shaking her head. I have nothing to say to him, she muttered, tossing it onto the kitchen table. But Sis was curious. She grabbed the envelope, tore it open, and started reading. It was pathetic. Chris begged for forgiveness. He swore he had changed. He claimed prison had made him see the error of his ways. He wrote about how much he missed her, how much he missed his family. The same family he lied to, cheated on, and abandoned. We thought it was a one-time thing. We were wrong. Every few weeks, another letter arrived. Each one was more desperate than the last. Sometimes he apologized. Sometimes he blamed everyone but himself. Sometimes he switched between the two in the same letter. One line would read, "I'm so sorry for what I did. You didn't deserve that." And a paragraph later, "You turned my own family against me. none of this would have happened if you hadn't thrown me out. Mum never wrote back. She never even opened most of them. Instead, she burned them. Every single letter Chris sent went straight into the fireplace. It drove him insane. We knew, because he started writing to sis, bro, and even me. The one I got was filled with empty threats and self-pity. I know you had a hand in all this. You think you won, but you won't be able to sleep at night, knowing what you did to me. Double quotes. I laughed. I slept just fine. Chris had lost everything, and he knew it. But he still had one last hope. Darla, the mother of his child. The woman he had thrown my mom away for. He probably thought that, when he got out, he would still have a family waiting for him. But reality hit him hard, because Darla had moved on. By the time Chris was released, she had filed for full custody of their son and sued him for child support. And she won. Chris, now living in Kansas, had nothing left. No job, no home, no one who cared. He tried to fight the child support case, but the courts didn't care. He had to pay up, and that's when the final letter arrived. This time, he didn't beg, he didn't apologize. He just wrote one last plea. I lost everything, I need your help. Mum burned that one, and just like that, Chris was gone from our lives forever. But not before we delivered one final blow. Because sis, bro, and I had one last piece of revenge to carry out. And this time, we made sure Chris would never forget it. Chris thought he had hit rock bottom. But we weren't finished. After everything he had done, the cheating, the lies, the drinking, the manipulation, Chris deserved to know exactly what it felt like to be completely powerless. So we made sure that every door he tried to open in his new life slammed shut in his face. First, his job prospects, with a criminal record stacked with doers, illegal possession charges, and a history of workplace misconduct. Chris was virtually unemployable in anything other than minimum wage work. But just to be extra sure, we did a little digging. We found out where he was applying, mostly fast food places, the only places that would give him a shot. And every time we learned about a new application, we made a discreet call to the manager. Hey, just a heads up, the guy you're considering hiring. He used to be a manager at Dairy Queen, got caught having sex with employees on the premises, fired, just thought you should know. Chris got denied, again and again. Second, his living situation. Chris had nowhere to go when he got out of prison. Darla had completely cut ties. She wanted nothing to do with him, and their son would never know his father. So he ended up couch hopping, bouncing between cheap motels and the homes of people who barely tolerated him. But that didn't last long. We knew people in his area. And word travels fast in small towns. Everywhere he went, people found out about his past. No one wanted him around. He wasn't just jobless, he was homeless. And finally, his reputation. Chris might have physically left our lives, but we made sure he'd never truly escape his past. Sis, bro, and I spread his story far and wide. Everywhere he went, he carried the weight of his own mistakes. He had no friends, no support, no future. Just regret, and the best part. Mum never had to lift a finger, she moved on. Found a good man who actually respects her, bought a house. Built a life that Chris could never be part of. And us, we slept soundly knowing that Chris was out there, drowning in the consequences of his own actions. He thought he could cheat, lie, and walk away without paying the price. But in the end, we made sure he lost everything. And we never looked back.